Estimate of the situation. General. The United States was founded on the idea that the people are sovereign. This philosophy is enshrined in the Declaration of Independence, which the Constitution's Bill of Rights are supposed to protect. In his July 4, 1926 speech, President Calvin Coolidge was aware of the dangers inherent in the Wilsonian ideas on progressive political evolution. Quote, "About the Declaration, there is a finality that is exceedingly restful. It is often asserted that the world has made a great deal of progress since 1776, that we have had new thoughts and new experiences which have given us a great advance over the people of that day, and that we may therefore very well discard their conclusions for something more modern, but that reasoning cannot be applied to this great charter. If all men are created equal, that is final. If they are endowed with inalienable rights, that is final. If governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed, that is final. No advance, no progress can be made beyond these propositions. If anyone wishes to deny their truth or their soundness, the only direction in which he can proceed historically is not forward, but backward, toward the time when there was no equality, no rights of the individual, no rule of the people. Those who wish to proceed in that direction cannot lay claim to progress. They are reactionary." Unquote. From the lofty perch where all men are created equal, are endowed with inalienable rights, and are only governed by the consent of the governed, Coolidge understood that Wilson's statist notions of progress could only result from the negation of the principles ensconced in the Declaration. Foreign and domestic opposition to America, from states, entities, and individuals, have undertaken long-term strategic efforts to fundamentally change America through cultural and institutional means aimed at negating the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights. This estimate of the situation will focus on the neo-Marxist left as the primary instrument of internal political dissent. Where appropriate, the language of the left will be used. As such, it will examine 1. The economic, social, and political grievances that are cited by the left in their own narrative. 2. The left's overall strategic intent and operational design. 3. The mainstream and conservative approach to answering and countering the left. Grievances, economic. The left's principal grievance with the American economic system is that free market economies are intrinsically unjust. In order to address this grievance, the left uses narratives that facilitate the ability to accrete the coercive power of the state in order to acquire and then redistribute the wealth domestically and internationally. Additionally, the oppression of workers, abuse of laborers, exclusion of minorities, the exploitation of immigrants, and related otherism grievances are manipulated by networks of single-issue groups controlled by the center to project an America that is fundamentally flawed. The left also raises the abuse of workers and the middle class by Wall Street investors and the lack of overall fairness and transparency within global commercial efforts, including those in the G7, the G20, and the World Bank. While there may be a basis for many of the grievances, the left's leadership often doesn't ascribe to them, but simply co-opts them as part of a voter mobilization strategy. The leadership realizes that these grievances can be used to channel people to action in support of their objectives. The left agitates grievances while propagandizing the population with socialist prescriptive actions and responses that channel actions, votes, violence, protests, etc. Once a community has been mobilized around an issue, it must have an opportunity to redress its grievances. In economic cases, business is the target where shareholder activism serves as a weapon. Following the Supreme Court decision on Citizens United, the left declared open season on enterprise and entrepreneurs. From 2011 to 2016, there was a dramatic increase in shareholder proxy resolutions filed against publicly traded companies by funds and individuals motivated by societal change rather than expanding shareholder value. For example, Walden Asset Management celebrated the submission of its 500th shareholder proposal in 2018. These shareholder proposals cover the landscape of popular leftist issues, but deal primarily with environmental, social justice, and governance, transparency, and government influence, often referred to as ESG issues, that rarely have the best interests of the shareholders or the company in mind. Rather, the resolutions often serve as dog whistles that signal activists to organize and engage in street theater in furtherance of altering the fabric of American civil society, not through political advocacy, but rather through corporate change campaigns. Another example, in 2017, activist investors affiliated with Proxy Preview, an ESG investing advisory operated by the nonprofit As You Sow, filed a series of proxies against McDonald's on antibiotic use in chicken and wage and labor policy. Each boardroom issue was campaigned by outside activist groups, Color of Change, and the Public Interest Research Group. Thousands of protesters took to the streets as part of a coordinated pressure campaign. The result? McDonald's changed policies. Consistent with narrative-driven mass-line campaigns, the left seeks to overwhelm the corporate structure through manipulation of public opinion. The left now works to change companies, their products, policies, and board compositions, and as a second-order benefit, to change civil society, and from there, the law. Grievances, social. The main effort of the left is social penetration. Because the American concept recognizes that sovereignty vests in the people as individuals, the Bill of Rights was drafted to protect the people from the very statist inclinations that consume the left. The Bill of Rights was written with the specific intent of assuring that what a person says, who he or she associates with, and what faith, if any, that person chooses to follow, are situated in such a manner that they are placed above and beyond the authority of the state. The social structure around which this vision is constructed is natural and foundational to all functional societies, the family. The left targeted each of these American elements, including the vision itself, for destruction through the formation of competing identity groups formed for the purpose of attacking each of the elements. Each of the groups identified below orients an antithetical other to a specific element of America. Political warfare efforts in the social domain execute narratives as social mass line efforts with the objective of powering down into the political domain, where an evolving fidelity to narratives will result in the non-enforcement of laws that, over time, will become institutionalized, thus overwhelming rule of law cultures as it consumes them. As the discussion on social grievances proceeds, it should be recognized that the groups identified below seek to secure privileges for the other that are granted to them by the state, which necessarily replaces an individual's inalienable rights, which the Bill of Rights was written to safeguard. By design, otherist group rights depend on statist concepts of the state, advanced by Hegel to negate rights endowed by the Creator. Consider how some state bars, like the Minnesota State Bar, condition the retention of an attorney's right to practice law on his or her taking bias continuing legal education CLE courses that, through practice, positions group rights at the pinnacle of rights. Seamlessly integrated into a political warfare execution matrix, this is Marcuse's repressive tolerance seeking the complete destruction of a culture, America, through negation processes, Aufheben, that simply apply Marx's critical philosophy through the efforts of a skilled, nihilistically committed, antithetical proletariat. Soft science scientism plays a role in structuring a pseudo-science in support of pseudo-realities, with intersectionality being among the latest scientized applications of the dialectic to a targeted cultural group. Not really science, these scientized concepts seek to impose a competing cultural cosmology based on the Hegelian notion of higher science. The American political system assigns responsibility to the individual and frames society under the rule of law and the Constitution. The left uses narratives to skillfully cast the American system as fundamentally unjust through a constellation of other constructs. Many of these narratives enforce pseudo-issues that are irrational and often plainly unnatural. The use of pseudo-issues to motivate and mobilize voters has proven particularly effective by the left. For example, immigration is among the other lines of effort that is used to attack national sovereignty in furtherance of the destruction of national identity. Rather than honestly address societal concerns relating to border security and illegal immigration, leftist activists focus on events calculated to generate outrage while slowly grinding down the very idea of sovereignty. As an example of how seemingly disparate other organizations can be predictably relied upon to swarm on a single issue, note the coordinated response to immigration. Color of Change, an African American advocacy group, has demanded Greyhound stop aiding the deportation machine and for Salesforce to end its contract with Department of Homeland Security Bureau of Customs and Border Protection. Presente.org, a Latinx 292 advocacy group, has demanded Wells Fargo and J.P. Morgan Chase stop financing GEO Group. GEO Group is a for-profit prison company providing holding facilities for detained illegal immigrants. Ultraviolet, a gender and women's equality group, has demanded the Trump administration end its attack on immigrant women and children. 18 Million Rising, an Asian American advocacy group, has demanded a new DREAM Act as well as the exclusion of citizenship questions from the 2020 census. As an Allied Media Project-sponsored projects network, 18MR conforms to the AMP network principles. Rather than openly address the immigration issue through legislation, debate, or electoral politics that they know the American people reject, the left relies on its constellation of others, complete with a broad array of pseudo-issues to swarm individuals and entities in a united front effort. Each of the groups listed above, and many more like them, can be affiliated with a single Oakland, California group, the Citizen Engagement Laboratory, the Center for Online Activism and Community Building. Another prominent clearinghouse for funding runs through the Credo Mobile, a prepaid virtual network that runs on the Verizon network. The left uses irrational, anti-knowledge, anti-reason, and anti-critical thinking narratives structured to subordinate a population to left-wing statist objectives. Overall, the left intends to enforce this line of thinking through the popular culture that brands its thinking as modern, scientific, kind, open, and thoughtful, when it is, in fact, none of these things. Rather, the left is arrayed against the Declaration of Independence and the concept of rights that it proposes. Grievances, political. If societal grievances are used to secure de facto authority over a population, then their powering down into the political domain reflects the effort to make that authority de jure. The left's principal political grievance against America is that it exists. Among the grievances is resentment of the very idea of individual sovereignty that assigns responsibility to citizens for the well-being of their own persons and of society. A governing principle dedicated to the protection of individual rights is antithetical to the sovereignty of states, as God bestriding the land. on which the left's statist ambitions are built. Political grievances are created by stoking up resentment against successful individuals. For example, the 1%, of which all the founding members of the Round Table belong. The left packages its grievances in bundles of don't have but covet issues regarding societal resource allocation schemes brokered by an empowered, wealth redistribution-oriented government, which coercively deploys to establish social justice. To advance social justice, the left frames issues in terms of group identity and then assigns individuals to specific identity groups, communicated to the public as an effort to increase fairness in the reallocation of resources. The intended effect of identity group assignment is the diminishment of the individual, whose rights become increasingly associated with the value of the identity group to which he or she is assigned. Citizen Engagement Lab coordinates and directs the activity of a constellation of identity and single-issue groups, including African Americans, Latinos, Asians as a homogeneous group, women, the LGBT community, as well as single-issue groups for employees, meteorologists, parents affected by climate change, people near hydraulic fracture sites, and the list goes on. The narrative that the American political system is archaic and flawed leads to the conclusion that the Constitution is obsolete, oppressive, and stands in the way of progress, and hence must be negated. As such, Marxists programmatically define America as necessarily flawed because it is archaic, necessarily oppressive because it is obsolete. Aside from whatever historical narratives are applied to the left's characterization of America, it must be recognized that dialectical movements are hardwired to see in everything that exists today the need for its being negated for tomorrow, which will always be better precisely because it represents the forward movement of history. It is the perfect nihilist construct on which to negate all that this is today. As Marcuse noted, America is repressive because it exists today. Therefore, it must be negated. Hence, alongside the slow-burning assaults on the American political system will be the unperceived replacement of America's historical understanding of itself with delegitimizing historical narratives calculated to quietly alter America's perception of itself. Austrian economist Friedrich Hayek recognized this slow, suffocating process when commenting on it back in 1944. Quote, "The whole apparatus for spreading knowledge, the schools and the press, radio and motion picture, will be used to spread those views which, whether true or false, will strengthen the belief in the rightness of the decisions taken by the authority, and all information that might cause doubt or hesitation will be withheld." Unquote. As Hayek rightly recognized back in 1944, the path the left charts is truly a road to serfdom. The left does not generally attack the Constitution directly. Instead, it obscures, detracts, and diminishes. Hence, direct attacks will indicate an escalation demanded by a scientific assessment of the correlation of forces. In the meantime, for example, the left uses America's history of slavery to delegitimize the Founding Fathers. This targeting of the Founders is used to delegitimize the nation they fought to create and the Constitution they formed to run it. As the narratives are structured to suggest, how can institutions created by such evil and fundamentally flawed white men be given respect today? Would this not, by definition, be a quote-unquote white nationalist government? The flogging of American history finds precedence in the writings of Mao. Quote, "Two principles must be observed. The first is, punish the past to warn the future, and the second, save men by curing their ills. Past errors must be exposed with no thought of personal feelings or face. We must use a scientific attitude to analyze and criticize what has been undesirable in the past. This is the meaning of punish the past to warn the future." Unquote. These economic, social, and political grievances resonate at the international level as well. Many of the left's objections to the United States are supported, propagated, and reinforced internationally through forums like the UN, the EU, the OSCE, the OIC, and others. The left utilizes grievances to mobilize their base, generate resources, frame narratives, and justify their actions as part of the collective good they successfully portray themselves as leading, just like a vanguard. This is not to say that there are not genuine grievances in need of redress or wrongs in need of being righted. The purpose of this discussion is not to delegitimize or ridicule what may be genuine grievances per se, but rather to point out that the left manipulates them in the service of otherism campaigns of cultural negation. As a tool of the left, there will never be a solution to the grievances because the purpose for their use is in the undermining of freedoms, reducing liberties, and destroying America. This assessment will examine the strategic approach used by the left.